Maybe someday. He is remarkable, humble to a fault, and genuine. I hope you like his story. I hope you feel the same renewal of faith that I felt for the 3 years I defended him and wrote the novel. I will now take questions. Emily's hand was up, but she was not called on first. She was second. Colonel Marks, I am writing a thesis on modern American war fiction. You say the incident is completely declassified in the introduction, but you don't state the actual name of the village, give the date of the incident, or the name of any participant. How can I find the truth in the actual reports? Jeremiah and I discussed this very thing. He is worried that his privacy and integrity will be compromised when the story comes out, so he asked me to be very judicious in making it easier for any investigator. I think he wants to be sure his tale is told by people who want the whole story and not a simple one. If you find the report, Ms. He paused. Scott, she said. Then when you see it, you will see that if you only read the abstract page, it gives no inkling of the actual acts of the title character. None. It assassinates his character by listing the things he was investigated for and does not mention he was cleared of them. Keep searching. I have a feeling you will soon have the report. He glanced up at me. I guess he'd seen her with me earlier. I nodded. I decided she was not to be stymied. If I didn't want the story to be told by someone like Emily, then who would be more honest and fair? I walked over to the main desk and asked for a pen and some scrap paper. I wrote, I am going out to dinner later with Lieutenant Colonel Marks and his sister. You are welcome to come if you'd like. I'd like you to. I folded it and put it in my pocket. Questioning was still going on. Several people were concerned that Jeremiah was too good to be true. Marks agreed that there had been tremendous pressure on Perkins to conform to simply herd the crowd to the end of the village and into the field and let the other Marines kill them. You understand he did that. Jeremiah suffers for a reason. He suspected that the Marines were not going to discriminate combatant from non-combatant. He ordered or forced the non-combatants out and into the ambush kill zone by his actions on the west side of the village. It was only after the massacre began that he gave contrary orders. He said to his NCOs, "This is on me." He took responsibility not in the fake way of politicians, but in the real way of men. I will risk my life and my reputation and my career. I will do what I can and expect consequences or punishment. This was his, and he suffered all those losses but his life. As you read in the last chapters, he spent 2 years without a visit from Marine friends, without orders, restricted. I was his Marine Corps while men and women he never met decided whether to charge him with some of the worst crimes possible: mutiny, disobedience of orders, murder, all for the virtuous act of saving 160 people who would never thank him, who would never feel gratitude, who would never acknowledge it. At 8:15, Jennifer called a halt, and people lined up to get their books signed. Emily was in line, too. I walked over to her and gave her the note. I said, "Here, this might be of interest to you." I moved away from the line then. She read the note and left the line. "You know Colonel Marks?" I nodded and smiled. "I'm more interested in whether or not you'll go to dinner with me, but yeah, I know him. You have an interesting way of asking a girl for a date." "I haven't asked a girl for a date since I was at Miami. I'm out of practice." "Why so long?" she asked. "Yes, why so long?" Barry wanted to know that, too. "Maybe because it's so hard to get a straight answer to the question," he said. "Will you go with me?" "Of course. It is a bit overwhelming. I've never spoken with a famous author. How do you know him?" "Good. Tom's after me to make friends. Barry was trying to set you and me up, too," I said. "Barry? Lind? He was trying to get me to ask you out. Actually, he said there'd be someone I should meet in the seminar, so it was you or Barb, but I didn't think he meant her." Smiling. "Probably not. He's been my advisor for the 2 years I've been at UC. Jennifer came over as the line moved, Tom diligently signing each copy. "Mr. Sims?" she asked.
He responded, "Jennifer, I'm Jonas Sims."
"This is Emily Scott. I've asked Emily to join us for supper, and she's accepted." "Wonderful. You were going to give him a hard time, so I guess you can do that over German food. It looks like Tom will be finished in about 10, so we can get going." Emily said, "Is the book selling well?" Jennifer answered, "Very, very well. We have ordered another printing. It is getting notice in academic circles and historical groups, military book club. I hear the history book club. And the story. I think people were crying out for a true and moral American story. There is so much cynicism. The idea that someone would see a wrong and try to right it is just so compelling. Well, I'm looking forward to giving your brother a hard time." Jennifer looked at her and then Jonas and responded, "Good. That will make the evening perfect then." Emily called her mother to say she was going to dinner - yes, a date, and would be home late. Jonas and she left their cars at Joseph Beth and rode in the backseat of Tom's rental expense account, a mile up the road to a German restaurant called Mecklenburg Gardens. The place featured waiters and waitresses in what must have been German costumes. Some of them even had German accents. It was a fun night. Emily was friendly and pretty and laughed easily. Jennifer talked about her children and how she'd gotten into Novel America. Tom talked about silly things his clients had done. Jonas talked about teaching and the things kids do. Emily talked of burning homes and villages and bodies to stop Ebola. She also mentioned that she had witnessed the aftermath of an atrocity in Ghana, the murder of dozens of schoolgirls by Muslim extremists. Emily said, "I met Jonas tonight in our history class." "How did you meet him, Colonel? What's your connection?" I think that was when Jennifer realized, or had confirmed for her, that Emily didn't know who Jeremiah was. Her eyes grew bigger. She looked at me. I shook my head a tiny bit. Before Tom spoke, she said, "Tom, I need to talk to you in private. Now." She stood up, as did her brother, and they walked off toward the bar. Jennifer put her hand on my shoulder as she left. I think she meant, "This is your chance. You better tell this girl." "Did I say something wrong?" Emily asked. She looked as if she'd committed a faux pas. I hesitated. "No, nothing like that, relax. I have kept this secret for so long it is hard now to relinquish. I forgot how rude it is to share a secret with all but one person present. Remember Tom said he chose Cincinnati for the first book signing for a reason? I'm the reason," I said. "I've never had to tell a girl I was in jail. You have my name. The village you are interested in is Alligator. Gatar. Type them into the Marine Corps page, and you're going to get hundreds of pages of testimony, pictures, documents. Tom saved me. He gave me back my life. That's how I know him." She just looked at me for a moment. "You are Jeremiah?" I took a deep breath. Her eyes were piercing and blue-gray. "Tom says I am. The book is very faithful to the accounts in the files you'll get. It's very accurate to my experience." "Why are you telling me now?" "The files are available. I'd rather have someone like you looking into it than some others who are out there. And I'm tired of hiding. I don't want attention. I hope no one bothers with me, but I am not going to pretend. I was there. I did what I did. I sent those people into the field." Emily studied Jonas's face, but he did not talk more. Tom and Jennifer returned then, thankfully. "I hope you cleared things up, Jonas," Tom said. He looked at Emily. "I've known Jonas since he was relieved. I was in Kabul, and that's where they sent him. It's all just like in the book. He asked for a lawyer, and I'd heard rumors of a great victory at Alligator. Did he mention the name? Good. So I went to see him, and he told me the damnedest story. He was shaking his head, and it was all true. I couldn't believe it at first. Massacre? My Marine Corps? But then I met people, and the ones who lied were the ones who expected to be believed. I spoke to Jonas's platoon, and it was 1, 2, 3, 4 straight down the line like in the novel. Word for word. I only invented dialogue when I had a statement like, he said something like he did this, or it was about doing this sort of thing. I assume you'll read the reports and interviews. The Corps threw him to the dogs before it realized he was the only one using good judgment." Jonas seemed perturbed and interrupted. "Kelly was my friend. He just couldn't handle the pressure," he said. "But Messina, he was so excited he was almost frothing at the mouth. Gunzablison," he said. "Oh my God." I shook my head. Silence. Zumwalt and Smith. How do I ever face their families? Jonas said, head hanging. Emily put her hand on his back, the first time she touched him. She was looking at Tom. "Those were the 2 Marines who died. Up on the hill with the machine gun," he said. "I promised myself someday I'd visit their families," Jonas said. There was quiet for a moment. "I think Dante was right," Emily said. "Purgatory is self-inflicted." Jonas looked up at that one. So did Jennifer and Tom. Jennifer leaned over. In Jonas's ear, she said, "I think she's a keeper, kid." So the dinner became talk, and soon it was getting close to closing time. They were the last there, and the staff was cleaning up. "Jonas, you need to deal with it. You have PTSD worse than you realize," he said, "and you haven't done anything to address it. You found work in school and then you stopped. You've avoided counseling. Your idea to visit the families of the 2 Marines is worthy, but could be a disaster, and would mean they would have to face the fact that their sons murdered people. Get the help. Even the Corps is changing how it sees therapy." Tom was right. The implication that the Corps' attitude would affect me was lost in the ether, but not the idea that visiting the families of the 2 dead Marines might be considered vindictive. Tom said, "Emily, if you need to talk to me for your paper, just give me a call. Jonas has all my numbers and address. I think you can reach Jennifer at Novel America if you want to get permission for excerpts and things." It will be given, by the way. It has been an honor meeting you. They took us back to our cars. Emily held Jonas's hand on the ride. Do you have your cell phone? She asked him. He got it out. She took it and programmed in her number. They pulled into the shopping center with Joseph Beth. I'll call you tomorrow, Jonas said. You don't need to request the materials on Alligator. That could take some time. They never hurry for requests from the public. I can send you the digital files and give you a hard copy if you'd like. I have them at home. Emily said, Tom, Jennifer, thank you for one of the most interesting and fun nights of my life. Meaningful. Jonas, thank you for asking me. The parking lot at Joseph Beth was practically empty but for their 2 cars. Jonas walked to her car with her and held the door. Tom and Jennifer waited until our cars were started before they left. So how was your date? Emily's mother asked in a low voice. Quiet, Dad's asleep. It was after midnight that Em had walked in, but she'd had so few dates since breaking off an engagement a year before that her mother was worried about her. Really very unusual. I went to that book signing where I met up with this guy from class. His name's Jonas Sims. Anyway, turns out he knew the author, so we all ended up at dinner together. Nice people all around. The author is a lawyer named Tom Marks. His editor is also his sister Jennifer. So just the 4 of us. We talked about the book in school. Jonas is a teacher over at Merciful Savior in Sky Gray. You like him?
Yeah, I guess he do.
I expect Jonas to call tomorrow today. Now, he has some documents to help me with my class project. Did you find out who the book is about? Or did the writer keep it secret? Em thought for a minute. I think they were sharing a confidence with me, but yes, they told me. I'm not sure if I'll reveal who it is or not. The guy has enough problems with PTSD and everything. It's a good book, maybe even a great one, her mom said. You got me to read it. Dad wants to read it next. All in all, a really good day, Mom. Jonas is a good guy, a year or 2 older than I. I think you'll like him. Oh, and he lives with his parents too. They both laughed. You work tomorrow? Yeah, I'm chartered from CVG to Dallas at 9. Then I return the plane. Should be home early evening, or late afternoon if there are no delays. Better get to sleep, Honorable. Good night, Mom. I called Emily while she was on a jet to Dallas the next day. Emily? Jonas. Hi, Jonas. I'm flying to Dallas now, but I can talk for a minute. I thought you'd be in class now. Prep period. I need your email to send you those documents. She gave her address, then said, if you want, I should be home around 6 this evening if you want to bring the hard copies over. My mom and dad will be home if I'm not. Why not stay for supper? I'll let Mom know. You're on your way to Dallas and you're coming back this afternoon? I'm the co-pilot. It's my day job. Jonas laughed. First you're fighting Ebola and now it turns out you fly planes. You're a woman with many talents. The main thing I did to fight Ebola was fly doctors around. My dad's a pilot and I got my license when I was 16. I've been commercial for 3 years now. Well, I'll leave you to your work. Dinner sounds great. I'll find your house. We're listed. Bye, Jonas. Bye. I found the Scott house on a street near the Great Miami River in an area called Lindenwold. It had several gables, a nice front porch. The road was not busy. I parked on the street. I grabbed my briefcase and headed up. My knock was answered by Emily. I was glad she was home. I didn't want to try to make small talk with her parents. Jonas, come in. Sweaters definitely became her. The house was dark wood trim and old, thick plaster. Solid. You can put the briefcase over against the wall. Mom's cooking. She's very excited for me to bring a guy home. I must say, I'd like to meet your parents. Okay, she said, taking my hand and pulling me to the kitchen. The whole place smelled of spinach and chicken breast and good cooking. Mom. Emily's mother was petite also, but rounder with the years. She was probably over 50, with reddish-brown hair, glasses, and intelligence in her gray eyes. Mom, this is Jonas Sims. Jonas, my mom, Sharon. We shook hands. My pleasure to meet you, ma'am. How do you do, Jonas? Very well. You have a lovely home. Very much like ours in Sky Gray. Jonas, said a man's voice behind me. I turned. Emily's father was several inches taller than I, perhaps 6 feet tall. He held out his hand. How do you do, sir? I said, taking the hand. Firm. Well, very well. Walter Scott. No, sir. Please. Let's go sit in the living room and get out of Sharon's way. I smiled. Did your parents like Ivanhoe? Emily abandoned me then to her father, staying to help her mother. He smiled and shrugged. Maybe. By the time I found out who Scott was, they were gone. Em was working and just got home, so she hasn't told us much about you, he said. We only met at our class yesterday, so I've only known her a day, I said. But she was interested in Tom's book. So we ran into each other at the signing and we all went to supper. It was fun. I have some papers she needs for her school project, so I brought them over. You teach at Xavier High? I have for 2 years. Once I get the master's, probably this summer, I'll think about teaching at a college. Or stay at Xavier. I'd like to coach some sports, I think. Baseball, basketball. What do you do for a living? Her father was nodding. I own most of a plane charter company. We own 7 smaller jets and some turboprops. Emily actually works for me, flying around the East Coast and South. She likes to be home at night, so we usually work that out. She's co-pilot on our small business jets, pilot on the props. He sounded proud. Smart as a whip. Knows the engines, the mechanics. Good pilot. How old are you, son? 27. If you've been at Xavier for 2 years, where were you before that? I was on active duty. Marines. Did you see any action? I hesitated then. I felt hot. Would it always come up so fast? Why couldn't I just lie or keep cool or whatever? Emily's dad saw I was uncomfortable. Yes. I'm sorry, if that is a sore subject. I have heard terrible things about the war, and it is not my business to poke around. No, Dad, you shouldn't, Emily said from the kitchen door. Supper is ready. We moved into the dining room. The table was prettily set. Emily and I sat across from one another, her parents at the head and foot. There were Parmesan chicken breasts, green beans, spinach and squash, cooked salad, some sort of chutney which I'd never heard of. Emily, would you say grace? Her mother asked. We all added our amen after, and we ate. It was good conversation, but I felt that I had committed a faux pas by not answering her father and by feeling so uncomfortable. As at my house, clearing and washing dishes was part of the meal. It was good talk and I washed because I didn't know where the dishes went. Emily and I met then over the dining room table to look at the documents I had brought. It was a complete set, perhaps 1,200 pages plus the few pictures in a separate manila envelope. Once I had shown her the organization, she had read the somewhat misleading abstract page. I made another decision. The pictures, I thought, were moving. We talked a few minutes, but for some reason the room felt like it was shrinking. I asked, will this stuff help you? She thought about it. I think it will help me understand the nature of the book, its relationship to what happened, and what Major Marks interpreted. It's going to be interesting. Good. I think you may want to visit the Marine site just to verify I didn't edit or censor the documents here. But they're all here. Jonas, I never thought you'd do that. I was perspiring, shivering. I want you to talk to your parents about me. Tell them it's me, after I'm gone. Why don't you? She asked, but she saw my discomfort. There are things I can't remember for some reason. Anyway, I should go. I went in the living room and thanked them for supper and I said, Mr. Scott, there are things I have trouble discussing. Emily will explain, I think. I should go now. He protested, thinking he had committed a faux pas by asking about my service. I assured him it was not that. I should be getting on. I think Emily can go over things. She was in the doorway, nodding. Of course. Emily's brother Chris will be interested to hear about you, Mr. Scott said. Emily has a brother. I exclaimed. Yeah, but he's away at school, Sharon said, smiling. I have a lot to learn about Emily yet. It's only been a day. Funny, but my life seems to be an open book compared to hers, I rejoined, smiling and looking at Emily as she shook her head and smiled. Thank you all for a great evening. I hope you'll be at class tomorrow night. She nodded. Then good night and thank you all. And I left. Emily looked at her parents after she closed the door. Mom, Dad, come out in the kitchen. I have some stuff to show you. During her explanation, her mother realized Jonas was Jeremiah. They studied the photos, skimmed statements. Well, you always say something about my boyfriends when you meet them. Well, Sharon looked at Walt. She smiled as she said, he is hurting still. 5 years now. Walt picked up the picture of Jonas with a child in his arms, running for their lives. He pointed to it. How do you beat that for an introduction? He's wounded in his heart, you know, Sharon said. Emily nodded. He's haunted by the 2 Marines who died, the little girl he can't remember, and that he didn't protect the first group of non-combatants to flee into the field, she said. But look at these statements from his own platoon. They're almost exactly like in the novel. It's easy to disbelieve superlatives as overstatement, but the military guys said them over and over. Walt said, looking to Emily, I didn't like Carl all that much, especially when he got drunked up those 2 times. I was kind of happy you broke off with him. And I know Jonas probably has a lot of issues from the war. I hope he's not drinking too much. I hope he gets a hold of it. He paused. But the guy's a hero. Tom Marks, the guy who wrote the book, called him the most morally courageous person he's ever met, Emily said. He knew his career in the Marines was over. He knew he might be killed. He knew protecting non-combatants would not be popular. For 2 years he was ostracized on that base, Camp Lejeune or whatever. Lejeune, Walt said, smiling. Sharon asked, do you intend to meet his parents? I guess. I've only known him for 27 hours or so. Walt said, you have a prop to Lexington, then to Evansville, then Dayton and Lunken tomorrow. What time's that class? 4. Just a bunch of half hours. Last one should finish a little after 3. I can drive straight to class from the airport, she said. Then with humor, she said, no problem as long as your planes work. Sharon, she's getting mighty cheeky since she got a boyfriend. Sharon and daughter shared a smile. Sharon thought, I think Emily likes having a boyfriend. This one, anyway. It was at seminar that someone mentioned Jeremiah. I had been taking some notes about my project and had missed the comment. I could see Emily across the table looking at Jonathan, a young guy who projected an air of righteous, anti-authoritarian indignation. I said nothing. Emily said, could you repeat that? I'm working on atrocities for my project and I need current opinions. He said, I think it is typical of the military to whitewash one of their own and make him out to be a hero, like this Alligator massacre. It's like My Lai or Malmedy. First they hide it, and then they praise it as a victory. I watched Emily stiffen. I thought to myself, she has hackles to raise. Barry was also interested. He'd been a late Vietnam-era liberal and believed that the protests and draft dodging had reduced American involvement and ended the war. He was working to have his dissertation published, dealing with this issue. He also knew I had been in the military, but he didn't know anything else. Based on what I've been reading and watching, it's the other way around when it comes to the Americans. They call it a victory and then try to cover it up. But are you saying there are never any moral actors during an atrocity? She asked him. As he talked, as she responded. I began to think that she felt he was spouting off without much information, perhaps repeating what some teacher in the past had said. Jonathan said, perhaps rarely. But isn't it an indictment or a moral failing that a free citizen surrenders his moral obligation to distinguish and act rightly by joining a military and swearing to follow orders no matter what? Barry jumped in. He did not want the exchange to become heated, which it was threatening. So, Jonathan, your point is that anyone in the military is at fault if anyone else commits an atrocious act? Yes, because it is immoral to surrender your individual responsibility to decide what is the right thing to do. Barb, the other woman in the class, spoke up. Why do you insist that a person in the military swears to follow orders no matter what? That he or she no longer judges the morality of orders and actions? I was surprised. Perhaps there was more to Barb than I had assumed in earlier classes, where she had seemed hesitant and quiet, almost meek. I know I didn't surrender that, said Juan, the only black member of the class. He was about 30, had made it known he'd served in the army and had not been sent to a war zone. I can tell you what I swore to, he said. Barry said, you don't think it is immoral to swear to defend the Constitution? Does that oath relieve a soldier of the responsibility to act morally? Yes, Juan said. Service is a virtue, properly carried out. There is a way to refuse an illegal order. But I always thought, said Jonathan, that it was illegal to disobey an order. This is all smoke to hide a wanton, heinous act. That was an insult, but I spoke up. I think Jonathan is right to some degree. I looked at Emily, then at Barry. At Alligator, no one was held responsible. One officer was investigated, but charges were never filed. Perhaps he was guilty, or perhaps not. But 30 non-combatants were killed, and no one brought to justice. Was no one responsible? The military prides itself on honesty and accountability. Where is it in this case? At My Lai, Callie was the only one at all punished, and he was eventually pardoned. At Alligator, one man was exonerated. No one was even tried. The look on Emily's face was unique. A mix of confusion and which side are you on and the world is flat. Things happen in war, Barb said. You have thousands of people making decisions based on orders and clarity is lost. The Marines whitewashed the whole Alligator killing. It was murder and that is that, Jonathan said. I agree it was murder, but that is not that, Emily said. Judging and assuming without deep investigation is not worthy of a civilized, armed society. Jeremiah did not resent the investigation. He resented the witch hunt aspect of it. He resented only one party was considered possible of guilt, and he feels culpable that he did not stop the killing earlier and that he did not save everyone. He thinks he could have. I've met the guy. And he seems like the sort who every day second-guesses his decisions that day. Barry was surprised. I knew you went to meet the author. I didn't realize he introduced you to the real Jeremiah. Emily hesitated but went on. Actually, someone else introduced me to Jeremiah, and it is a little bit like crime and punishment. In the book, it is his conscience that punishes him. He knows he is not guilty of the murders. He feels guilt because he anticipated them but did not prevent them. He knows he reduced their scope, but that is not enough. She thought for a moment and continued. I think it's that way for the real guy, at least the author claims, but I don't know Jeremiah that well to say. It was a discussion worth holding. Stereotyping provides clarity, delineates, and ultimately reduces understanding. American minds are often closed because it simplifies understanding of the world. Jonathan did not want his stereotypes shattered. Patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel, said another Jonathan 2 centuries before, and therefore the Marines are bad, period. In this case, he was close to right for the wrong reason. Marines did not sacrifice their humanity and responsibility by their oath. At that dusty village they failed both. We failed both. Alligator was evil and would never be resolved because there was nothing to resolve. The event was investigated thoroughly. It was murder, the evil was in chunks of irresponsibility hidden by loyalty and the chain of command, and only the implicated and the victims wanted justice. It was a month later that Marty called Jonas into her office at the end of a day. Jonas, I have a disturbing piece of information. One of our board members has information that you were investigated for murder. Is that true? Yes, ma'am. Were you charged? Indicted? No, ma'am. The board president has asked me to remove you from the classroom until such time as these allegations are cleared up. I'm afraid I will have to do so immediately. Jonas felt a pressure in his chest he had never felt, a squeeze that let him know he was stressed. The board will meet tomorrow night to consider the case. You are asked to attend. It will be a Friday, I know, but these things need to be handled quickly, especially if a teacher needs to be removed. Yes, ma'am. Do you have anything to say? He looked at her. She saw pain in his eyes. I think Malamud said, some mistakes you never stop paying for. I called Tom that evening. I explained the situation. He was absolutely flabbergasted. I told my parents nothing, nor Emily. I hoped I could clear it up without them ever knowing. The next evening I walked into the school auditorium. As a personnel matter, the public was not invited, but there was a reporter present. I also was surprised, really was I, to see Tom Marks walk in. He was in a fine suit, of which he probably has several. He walked over to me. We shook hands. Tom, you didn't have to come. I'm your lawyer. I'm making gobs on that book. It's about time I earned it. Mrs. Martin walked in. The board appeared on the stage. 8 men, for women, Father Elkins. Argo, the board president, called the meeting to order. Tom and I sat in chairs away from the table, but on the stage. There was a video screen set up and a projector. I have here the front page of an investigation into the actions of Lieutenant Jonas Isaiah Sims in a village in Afghanistan. The summary states that Lieutenant Sims was relieved of his duties so that investigation into allegations of murder, mutiny, disobedience of a lawful order, and some others could be conducted. Charges were never brought. Is Mr. Sims present? I stood up. I am, Mr. Argo. What do you say to these charges, Mr. Sims? There were no charges, Mr. Argo, I said. There was a moment of slight confusion for the board president. Marks whispered, maybe you don't need me after all. What do you say to these allegations, Mr. Sims? Said Mr. Argo with a hard edge to his voice. I do not usually engage in refutation of mere allegations. If we cannot get to the bottom of this, we will be forced to terminate your contract in the best interests of our students. We need to know that they are in good hands. I began to speak again, but Tom put his hand on my arm. Allow me. I came a long way. If I may address the board, I represent Mr. Sims's legal interests. My name is Tom Marks. I am an attorney and licensed to practice in just about every state and civilized nation, including Ohio. I am also a lieutenant colonel in the Navy JAG office. Mrs. Martin spoke. Mr. Marks called me about this and asked to make a presentation to the board that he thought might help us. We set up the projection screen and you have some slides, I believe? Yes, ma'am. Pleasure to meet you. We spoke one other time. I recommended you hire Mr. Sims. I recall it. You said some amazing things, she said. All true. Some of that will become clearer here. Now, if I may, I'd like to address the issue. The page you have in your hand is the summary or abstract on the front of a military investigation report conducted by Naval and Marine Corps investigators and other investigators over the course of 2 years. He picked up his briefcase, which was standing beside his chair. Placing it on the table before the board, he opened it and removed a copy of the investigation, all 1,200 or so pages. The abstract gives the impression that Lieutenant Sims was guilty of a crime, or likely was. If you had taken the time to read the report, which with appendices and index and photos takes up at least 1,000 pages, including interviews with not less than 78 Marine enlisted men and commissioned officers, you would have been overwhelmed with evidence of another kind. Instead of going into detail of each allegation, I will tell you what happened that day using the few pictures of it as evidence. I've used a computer to clear up what were very blurry images off a cell phone camera. I have others, unclarified, at hand if you'd rather see them. Otherwise, you may look at the actual report here, or ask Captain Sims to furnish you one because he has several copies, I'm sure. He looked at me and I nodded. Yes, sir. There were 9 pictures taken at the village of Alligator on the date in question. Lieutenant Sims and his platoon were ordered to clear the village of Taliban. Intelligence reports said there were at least 40 Taliban present, and the intel was irrefutable. Actually, there were no fighters present. There were no Taliban in Alligator that morning. Lieutenant Sims's platoon attacked on time, pushing the non-combatants they found toward the eastern end of the village as they were ordered to do, where another Marine platoon was to confront the Taliban with an ambush. Lieutenant Sims notified the other platoon that there were no Taliban, only non-combatants. As the first non-combatants cleared the last houses of the village, they entered an open field and were promptly killed by the Marine ambush. We have no pictures of that happening, but one of the open field with bodies. The picture of the bodies in the field appeared on the screen, cleaned up by computer and much clearer than my copies. If you look here and here and here, Tom said using a laser pointer, you see women in burqas dead. If you look closely you can see children, but I just won't point them out. Oh my God, one of the women on the board said. Captain, where were you in relation to this picture? I answered, I was just out of the picture to the right. I was directly in front of that building with the kid missing a foot and the old guy there, maybe 15 feet from the building. How long had these people been dead when this picture was taken? Approximately? About 15 minutes. There were lots of other non-combatants huddling in the buildings and there against the walls. What happened at this point, Captain? Tom asked. First platoon up on the hill relocated 2 machine guns and turned their fire on these first buildings and the street. I had people in or near them. I called them, but they continued to fire. They destroyed this building in front of us, killing the boy and the old guy. At that point the picture changed, and you could clearly see the 2 bodies and the building in tatters. I saw the old man's body, which was blurred and unrecognizable in my copies. He was obviously dead. My heart cried. Go on, Captain. It took me a second. Sorry, sir. I haven't seen these photos cleared up by computer before. It's the first time I can identify the old guy's body. My voice cracked. I was close to tears. I sought control, needed it, grasped it. I ordered my men to fire up at the machine guns so we could get back down the street. Then we gathered everyone we could and ran back to the west. Again, the picture changed. It now showed me holding that kid and running. That is me carrying a kid and trying to get everyone back. In the background you see Turbish carrying a woman under his arm and shooting back. Turbish thought he killed the 2 machine gunners. I don't see how, but their fire decreased about this point. Marx added, if you look closely at the picture you can see non-combatants here, and here, this Marine over here actually kicked this kid to get him going, according to his statement. I continued, once fire slackened at the other end of the village. I got back on the radio with Captain Messina and he was furious. He relieved me. I went over to help who I could. A lot of the non-combatants were banged up. I think there's a picture of me wrapping a kid's foot. The picture came up. I was arrested and sent to Kabul by Hello that night. Lieutenant Colonel Marks was assigned as my lawyer. Mr. Argo asked, so what were the bases of the allegations? Marks answered, he was ordered to push all unsecured people into the field and refused. He ordered his men to fire on other Marines, 2 of whom died, that's the murder. Ordering his men to protect the non-combatants and get them to the west was the allegation of mutiny. You should understand that the Marine Corps at first reported the dead women and children in the field as a great defeat of the Taliban. That is how I heard of it before they assigned me as counsel. Sims was eventually restricted to base, and after 2 years allowed to go into the reserves. He was interrogated 52 separate times for a total of 109 hours. Some of those were only a few minutes. One was 26 hours long. He was not waterboarded, but it was threatened. I was waterboarded in training once, I said, so I knew what it was. There was silence. The board seemed reluctant to take up the case. Marks filled the quiet room then. Ms. Martin, board members. He saved 158 Afghanis. He was investigated and interrogated for 2 years. He was ostracized by the Marines. He is the bravest living commissioned hero of a dirty war. He stopped and looked directly at the board members. He teaches history at Merciful Savior. Ms. Martin spoke. Tom, you wrote that book, Jeremiah in Agony, didn't you? Yes, ma'am. Jonas is Jeremiah. This is part of his struggle. I can prove every word in that novel, using official documents. He is not a figment of my imagination. He did it. He's paying for it. The board voted to return me to the classroom effective immediately. Emily. Sharon was calling her daughter, her hands holding the morning Cincinnati Enquirer. Get up. You want to see this? Toward the bottom of the front page was a headline, Jeremiah teaches at Savior. Emily came down the steps, hair mussed and looking lovely and rounder with sleep. She looked at the headline and skimmed the article, which was mainly about an effort to remove Jonas as a teacher until he was defended by the author of Jeremiah in Agony. How do you think this will affect him? I don't know, Mom. He didn't tell me what was going on. I don't think he can open up to me, maybe not to anyone. It seems like he will never get out of Afghanistan. Emily sat on the step, where her mother had met her, and thought. It was Saturday. She had no flights. Jonas had not called. He had not seen her since Thursday seminar. She was disappointed that he had not turned to her when he was faced with a new trouble. She wondered if her appropriate response was anger, but she saw the depth of the attack on Jonas's character and decided she would turn to him. Mom, I'm gonna get dressed. I've known this guy a few months. He opened up about the incident and depth of his problem to me, almost from the moment I met him. But he hurts and can't do it when the pain is great or sharp. But maybe he will. I gotta get dressed. What time is it? 6:30. I think it's time I met his parents. She turned and went up the steps. She threw off her clothes and showered, and by 6:45, she was heading for the front door. I need the paper, sorry. She took it, got in the car, and left. She'd never been to Sky Gray. She found his house. At 7:40, Jonas's mother opened the front door and was surprised to find a small, red-headed woman sitting on the top step with her back against the support pillar. In her hands were 2 copies of the Cincinnati Enquirer. Hello, she said. Mrs. Sims? Hi, I'm Emily Scott, a friend of... She got up. Jonas's friend. Yes, he's mentioned you. He's still asleep. He had some meeting last night, and I think he couldn't sleep then. I know. It's in the paper. Emily handed Mrs. Sims their paper, which she'd picked up from the yard when she arrived. That's why I'm here. Well, why don't you come in, dear? I'll make coffee. Mrs. Sims looked at the headline and the article. This can't be good, can it? Emily, walking in. I don't know. He didn't even tell me about the board meeting. Mrs. Sims said, he didn't tell us either. The coffee was on. Mrs. Sims went upstairs and warned Mr. Sims not to come down undressed, as they had company. Mr. Sims was quite surprised that a girl was downstairs for Jonas. Mrs. Sims then went over to Jonas's room and got him up. Jonas, wake up and now. What is it, Mom? Well, your meeting last night is in the newspaper. That's something, but not why I'm here. There's a girl downstairs. Emily. She was waiting with the paper on the porch when I went outside. Emily? Downstairs? Now? He said. Yes, and I think she is a little peeved at you for not telling her about the meeting. I gotta get dressed. Go keep her company, okay? Okay, your father's up too, so you can fight over the hot water for the shower. Mrs. Sims headed down. That's one way to get the men moving, she thought. Just get a beautiful redhead to show up on the porch. She poured coffee for Emily. They'll be down shortly. Why are you here? Emily said, I thought the story and the meeting might be upsetting to Jonas. I am a little upset he didn't tell me, but with all he's been through, I wanted him to know I wasn't abandoning him like most people. I have known him only a few months, but he's been honest and told me things he hasn't said to others. He told us about you, Emily. Mrs. Sims started making some cinnamon rolls, greasing a pan and getting the oven going. Ready in about 20 minutes. I hope good things. Mrs. Sims sat with a cup. You are the only girl he's shown interest in 4 years. So what do you do? We met in history seminar at UC, but I'm a pilot. My family has a plane charter service and I fly businessmen around the East Coast, the South, usually. No flight today though. But you are so tiny. Mrs. Sims said. Emily smiled and imitated a movie. Never. Dallas. They laughed. Kate Hepburn had red hair, too. Mr. Sims walked into the room, his hair wet, but dressed unusually well for early Saturday. Emily stood. Good morning, Mr. Sims. I'm Emily, Jonas's friend. He held out his hand and they shook. You are beautiful, Paul, you don't say that to a lady, his wife said. Excuse him, Emily. I thank you. I came here because my mom showed me this, and she handed him the paper with the article centered. Mr. Sims read for a few minutes. He harumphed once or twice. Emily was sitting again, sipping coffee. Mr. Sims finally made his way to his seat. The three of them were at the kitchen table when Jonas entered. Emily, hi. I see you've met my parents, he said. Emily decided to be forthright. Pushy, too. I realize after what you have been through that you may have trust issues, but you should have told us, about the teaching suspension and the meeting last night. Jonas thought, she sounds mad. He looked at his mom, and she seemed to be on Emily's side. Dad? He was looking down at the paper, so no help there. Why hadn't he confided? Emily was a new person in his life, and there was no commitment but his parents. Who else knew him as they did? Who else loved him? The pause was long. Dad, he said, I need a therapist. His dad was the tough guy, the silent, the serious, the stalwart. Yes, you do, Dad said. Sit down now. These people are on your side. Over cinnamon buns and coffee, they talked and discussed the newspaper article, the meeting, and the future. I think you'd like his father, Dad. He's a mass of quiet and hold it in and keep it to yourself and deal with it, and yet, you could see how much he loved Jonas. And the way Mrs. Sims looked at her husband was as if she was shocked he had said Jonas should get help, Emily said. I think you would like him. Maybe I see some of you in him. A good part, I hope. Goes without saying. Mrs. Scott smiled. And his mom. She called me dear and I usually hate that, but it was like I was at home with her. Emily was thoughtful. Her romance with Carl was a wooing and capture, and finally her rejection of his foibles and bad judgment. Jonas was deeper. His goal wasn't a good drunk on Friday night with a girl waiting to forgive him. They're a little older than you guys. Good people. Her parents laughed. How long have you known him now? Her mother asked. 2 months. Emily responded after thinking. Not so long yet. No, not long. Be careful, Em. It's easy to jump in too fast. He doesn't make a move, Mom. He doesn't try to make out or put his hands in the wrong places or anything. He doesn't move at all. He is hurting. He avoids even the little risk of a kiss or holding hands. He looks at me as if he has never seen a woman before, and he holds the car door and says goodnight. It's like he thinks women are too valuable. I've kissed him goodnight, and on the cheek, but he lets me do it. Has he told you about his other girlfriends? No, not one. His mom said I was the first girl he'd had any interest in 4 years. I think he has a great pain. Do you think he is good? Emily did not know how to phrase it. Sharon did not know how to answer it. Could be. I love you, babe. Be careful. Keep me in the loop. I like him, but I want you to decide on the real guy, not the book and the passion and the torture of his life. It was easier with Carl. Of course. Carl got drunk for recreation, manufacturing reasons. Jonas has reason to drink and fights it. Maybe I should look for a guy with no issues. Sharon chided. Silly. There are no guys worth marrying who don't have issues. Good guys have issues because they care about important things. I saw Emily again on Sunday. Saturday morning was a warm memory. She had gone out of her way. Despite that she had not met my parents, she had talked and acted like someone who liked me. No, like someone who loved me. She came over in the afternoon, at my behest, and we talked in the living room. Mom and Dad were around and left us mostly alone. Dad found out she was a pilot and was askance. What? But she is so tiny, he said. Same as Mom. I grew up with flying, she said. We sat in the living room and we discussed life and politics and religion. She's Presbyterian. An impossible word to spell quickly, and my situation and her plans. I told her about growing up, about Jane Miller Austen and moving on and wondering why I was so shy around pretty girls. She talked about Carl and breaking it off and some guy who talked her into the senior prom. She said that some people really hated freckles. I laughed. I told her about Turbo Boost, who carried women to safety who would never look at him because he was American and big and not Muslim and black. I talked about guys I hardly remembered. We laughed at this and that. She stood to leave. She handed me a paper. I ran off some names of therapists who deal with PTSD and veterans at a discount, and there are a lot. There's a VA program. I got them through the VA hospital online. Call one of these. If you want me to go with you for some reason, I will. I kissed her forehead. Like I was her dad, I thought. I put my hands on her shoulders, then, and kissed her lips. Not like her dad. Great lips. The shoulders were good, too. Monday afternoon, Dr. Barry Lind was surprised to see Jonas Sims enter his office. Jonas, what can I do for you? He asked. He pointed Jonas to a seat in the cluttered room. I just wanted to give you a heads up, because people are starting to find out. You know how I told you I was in the military? Yeah. You remember the discussion the other day about Jeremiah? Emily told you she had met him? Yeah, I remember. So? You introduced us in class, sort of. I am the guy in the book. That's how I knew the author, Jonas said. Barry was quiet. He steepled his fingers and then got a humorous look. So we like to keep secrets, do we? He had a smile. Jonas smiled. Only because I still have lots of issues. I start with a therapist soon. I'm glad you told me. So are you dating Miss Scott? He said. As a matter of fact, I am. Lynn smiled. She's something. I had her in another class and thought if I were not married. You're elect, Professor Dr. Lind. Just don't tell my wife. She probably knows. It was our 4th session, 2nd week. Callie was the name. I picked a woman therapist. 4 issues from the war? I do not know. Am I trying to subvert? Do I want to fail? Would failure succeed? She is 50 or so, big, smart. I said, I think I am falling in love with Emily. Why do you think that? I cannot stop thinking of her. Her hair, her freckles, her shape, her. Perhaps it is not love. What then? What could it be? Obsession, infatuation, puppy love, desperation, a link to reality. Callie was not rising to the level of the emotion, he thought. Why do you only think you are falling in love? I cannot trust. I'm afraid to commit even to myself. Why is that? I sent dozens to their deaths because I trusted my fellows to do the right thing. I then ordered my Marines to shoot at other Marines. 2 of the others were killed. Guilt? Murder? Have you ever been in love before? No, not really. There was Jane, growing up. She's married with kids now. I've seen her in church a few times. We chat. Her husband seems like a good guy. But it was just a crush or a kid's thing. Yeah. When I left for college, she went a different way. When I left for Afghanistan, she was married. No, I don't think it was serious. We never talked of marriage. Is Emily good for you? What does that mean? Are you a better person around her? Laughing. I like her because she's pretty and smart and competent. And good, gentle, concerned. She talks to people looking right at them. And I think she liked me right away. She is not profane or crass, at least not in the situations I have been around her. She went to Africa to fight Ebola. She's competent at what? Life. She's a commercial pilot. She makes good comments in class. When she found out about Algator, she did not criticize or avoid me or anything. Has anyone? Just the Marine Corps. Has she criticized you at all? Well, she was mad at me for not telling her about my teaching suspension and the board hearing. How did that feel? Good. It felt good. That she was mad. Why? She came over to my house about 7 in the morning, the next morning after the meeting when she found out about it. She hadn't met my parents yet, so it wasn't easy. She was waiting for Mom when she went out to get the paper. I think she criticized me while making her affection for me obvious. What do you think she sees in you? I think she sees me as a good person with a personality flaw. What's the flaw? I can't trust. Oh, but I think you can. And do. I think you are misdirecting me. Such as Tom Marks, the school board. You let them see everything about Algator. You trusted Emily's parents the night you met them, telling her to explain about you, but you were too nervous to stay. Your parents. I don't know about Father Rick, you haven't mentioned him much. He's been busy. I've only seen him once since I got out of the Marines. 2 years plus now. I want you to think about all the people you trusted. Emily, have you told her you're falling in love? No, it's only been 4 months. Only 4 months? Mom says you shouldn't get married until you've gone through a whole year of family gatherings, holidays, and that sort of thing. That's a wise rule. But I'm talking about love, not marriage. You were trying to deflect the conversation. Think so? No, I haven't told her. Don't you think she has a right to know? I guess. Have you told your mom or dad? No, but I talk about her to them. You are ornery. You stifle yourself. You have friends, but you avoid including them in the most important part of your life. More criticism. You're paying me. He went back to Cali a few days later. What is the worst thing you saw in Afghanistan? Jonas thought. I think seeing that kid get slaughtered by the machine gun. The kid without the foot. He was helpless and handicapped and just wanted to live. And we just destroyed his protection and him with power. Not the women in the field? You're asking me to distinguish within an atrocity as to which is the most atrocious. I resist that. When you talk about that day, what do you say? I tell them what happened. I think I am comfortable explaining what I did, what happened, and why. They don't demand more than I want to give, usually. Ever. Actually, do your students ask about it? Jonas laughed. Yes. After the board held their hearing, I felt like I could talk to my kids. I told them what happened, how the book was about me. I became popular for a few days. Just a few days? How do you tell? How are your evaluations? Middling to good. I think I am getting decent marks, but not the best. A few sessions ago, you were talking about how the progressivist educational philosophy did not inspire you. What do you think now? In all my study of history, it is the people of character who make the world better or save what is best about it. We seem to teach some subjects because we want our kids to have the best chance in society. But I think we teach history and social studies because there are great ideas and things we need them to know so that our society is better off. So for my subject, I reject the progressives. They want a selfish, educational system as if our society is a constant or there to enhance our selfishness or self-centeredness. They want us to prepare children for our society. I think in history and social studies, we should be teaching kids not so much to fit in as to evaluate their society. How is it, and how could it be? I like the perennialists and essentialists, but don't tell anyone. The progressivists dominate education. They practically disdain people who agree with me. I've heard that. Callie smiled. Have you talked to Emily? Yes. Well, we talk. We are not lovers. Not that way, anyway. How do you feel? I'm falling in love with her. You said that months ago. Love is a long ways down. Ask her to come next time. She's very busy. Ask anyway. Tom Marks called one evening. Jonas, how are you? Doing well. Tom, how goes the book? The book is selling. It's nominated for several book awards. Looks like it'll be up for the Pulitzer. Wow. I'm calling because my publisher has a proposition for you.
Proposition.
Yes. They'd like for you to go to some promotional interviews after the school year ends. TV shows, 1 or 2 book signings. Completely up to you, and no pressure for me. They'll pay expenses and a small share of profits during the 3 months. Do you want me to do it? Completely up to you, but it could be fun for you. I'll think about it. Emily, would you like to meet some of my kids? Jonas asked her in early May. There's a softball game, and I promised them I'd come by. It's early, around 4:30 Wednesday, at Xavier. I'd love it. I'll try to schedule around it. Have you told them about me? I said I'd bring my girlfriend. I didn't mean to presume. If I'm not your girlfriend, who is? She asked. He was going to make a list but said nothing instead. He decided that was a good move, once he considered. It was a gray day, with the sun finally poking through the clouds as 4 o'clock came by. It was a warm, moist day, but windy. Jonas's girls were worried the wind would blow out, and they'd be in for a long afternoon. Their record was 3-7, and they thought they were lucky to win 2 of those. Jonas was in the stands and noticed Emily's arrival. Emily pulled into the school parking lot, still in her flying uniform and a light jacket. He walked out to meet her. Good flying, he asked her. Always. A bit windy just made one touchdown a little more fun, but no problem at all. Jonas held her hand, and they walked up to the grandstand, taking a seat in the bleachers. It was almost immediate that the Xavier girls noticed Jonas with Emily. They were taking their infield practice. Jonas started to say something to Emily, but then stopped himself. Be ready, he said. As soon as the coach pulled them off the field, they made a beeline for the fence gate and Emily. Suddenly, she was surrounded by 10 or 12 adolescent girls, all asking her name and what she did and how long she'd known Jonas, who was off to the side and almost ignored. He was laughing as the kids besieged his date, pushing past parents who wondered who was of such concern. He had been to 2 other games, so parents knew who he was and that it was his girlfriend who sparked the interest. Marcy Kilgallen came straight to the point. Who are you and what's the uniform? I'm Emily Scott, and I'm a pilot for a charter airplane service. Who are you? Marcy, and how long have you known Mr. Sims? Jonas and I met in January, in a history class, as a matter of fact. Tawana Balling asked, are you getting married? Emily looked coyly toward Jonas off to the side and said, he'll have to ask me to find out, but I think we have a long way to go before that is an issue. At which the girls all laughed. Emily, and Jonas to some extent, were then saved by the appearance of the coach, who wondered who had kidnapped his team. The next day, in class, Jonas got an earful. She's way pretty, Mr. Sims. Are you gonna ask her to marry you? I didn't know girls were pilots. Doesn't it make you scared she's a pilot? Look, I've known Emily for a few months. We take a class together, and we date some. So far, I like her a lot, and I think she's a good person and really, really smart. She flies some of those little jets and 2 propeller planes you see flying out of the smaller airports, usually Oh, and I think she's way pretty too. Welcome, Emily. I'm Callie, Jonas's therapist. Pleased to be here. Jonas has mentioned he was going to a therapist. I'm not sure why I am here though. You are important to him. Has he told you? He calls every day. We see each other a few times a week. I went with him to watch some of his kids play softball a few weeks ago, and it was like I was a star attraction. The whole team came up in the stands to see me before the game. You probably broke a few hearts. Yeah, right. They were cute, but you don't realize how young you are when you are in high school. But he doesn't articulate his feelings? No, Emily said. Jonas, how do you feel about Emily? Here? You are making me say it here? Just a request. Jonas turned to Emily. They were sitting on a small couch together. Callie was in a chair. I think I'm falling in love with you. Emily held his hand. Think so, huh? Silence. Maybe I should run with that to the bank and deposit it, Emily said. Callie interjected. She means you hedge even the most important statement. Love has a commitment attached for me. I hesitate to make the commitment, he said. What is the commitment? To love is irrevocable, for me at least. What do you think of that, Emily? Who would want to revoke love? So do you think he really loves you? Emily was quiet for a moment and then answered, I think he is afraid. I think he cannot make the commitment on his own. Yet? Callie and Jonas were silent at that, perhaps agreeing. Then Callie said, What was the worst thing in your life, Jonas? Jonas closed his eyes. Looking out on that field was bad. I was responsible. Are you sure? What was your mistake? I trusted the other platoon to do the right thing. Alvy Kelly. I told him they were non-combatants, but the captain must have had him fired up and eager. Is that normal in battle? To get all fired up? What's it like? Sometimes it's like before the big game with people getting psyched up, jumping and eager because the aggression can win the battle. I read about a helicopter assault like that in Vietnam once. Other times it is like you want to be cold and determined. My guys were cold and determined that day at Algator. I had them determined to follow my orders. I rehearsed it all with them, in their minds over and over. How many shots for recon? Who would do it? Where to fire if there were no Taliban? It was what I did that morning before we got on the helos. So because you trusted your friend to do the right thing, a bunch of people were killed. Slaughtered. Emily squeezed his hand. I dreamed of it one time like this. I remember a kid crying in the road and Paritsky kept yelling, Get moving, kid. Go. Get out of here.